Welcome back to the channel, guys. This is part 2 of restoring this M6. In the first part, we did rod bearings, high pressure veinous pump, high pressure veinous line, injectors, throttle body actuators, thermostat, oil cooler, obviously new oil in it too, but we still have the issue with the SMG leak, so we're gonna dive into that today. I'm gonna raise the car up. And then you can make it go bop, bop, bop. Right, so here is the SMG. Have a couple of rags shoved up in there because we're leaking transmission fluid right at the bell housing here. And so the SMG takes 2 fluids. The gearbox has a fluid for actually going inside the gearbox, and then Pentosin CH11S, same as in the power steering fluid for the hydraulic SMG portion. So you have like the accumulator, SMG pump is up there, along with the clutch valve and the slave cylinder. I'll show you on a transmission we've already got pulled out. So this is a spare SMG that we have here. Here's the SMG pump, the accumulator, there's that clutch valve, the reservoir that you fill through here. And then here's the slave cylinder and the clutch position sensor. The slave cylinder goes inside the bell housing here. And so what we're suspecting happened, unless this plug or this seal went bad, the slave cylinder has gone bad and is causing a fluid leak. So we are going to need to remove all of the exhaust here, this bracing here, all of this heat shielding so we can disconnect the drive shaft, take the bolts out for the SMG support there, and then we'll be able to lower the transmission down, get to the bell housing bolts, and see if the clutch and the flywheel will be able to be saved since there's a bunch of fluid inside the bell housing. But let's get started. All right, first thing we're gonna do to remove the transmission here is the flanges that go from the manifold to the rest of the exhaust. And they're held on by 14mm nuts on the back here, and then E12 on the front. So we're gonna remove both of these from the driver's side and both of these from the passenger side. All right, with the exhaust flange bolts removed, we can now move down to the brace here. So these braces that go to the back, we're gonna remove those, and then also remove the exhaust mounts there too. And all of these bolts are all 13mm. All right, now that we have all of these removed, we can do the back bolt on the brace, and it's right through this hole here, and it is also a 13mm. All right, before we remove the muffler section, we're gonna use the transmission jack and put it between the secondary cats and the resonator here to support the weight of the exhaust before we move to the rear. All right, exhaust is supported. Now back here, don't mind the cobwebs. We'll undo the 13s that hold the hanger there, and then we're gonna have to also go back and remove the 13s that hold the rear muffler hangers on too. And we'll have to do that on both sides. All right, now that the exhaust is all unbolted from the car, it's a good idea to have 2 people. We'll let the transmission jack down and remove the exhaust. All right, now that we have the exhaust out of the way, we need to do all of the 8mm here, here, basically around this entire perimeter. Our 8mm screws, there are a few 10mm in there also, but pretty much we're gonna take off this whole shield and likely these side shields there too. Let's start removing 8mm. All right, main drive shaft cover is out. We can now see the drive shaft and the center support bearing. This one is pretty solid. All right, with the center heat shield out of the way, we can now remove these 2 right there, also held on by 8s. And these ones are the 10mm. All right, with those 2 big shields out of the way, we can now move on to the last set of heat shields. These guys here and here. And if you look straight up there, it's a 10mm nut on each side, and these shields will come right off when we can get to the fun stuff. With the exhaust and the shields out of the way, now we're going to remove this bracket, and it's held on by these 3 10mm nuts. Next, we're going to remove this bracket and the electrical to it. So we have O2 sensor connectors here and here, and on this holder there. So we're gonna remove all of these connectors. We're gonna cut this zip tie here and here so we can get all of this out of the way. And then we're also gonna come over to the other side, disconnect the crankshaft position sensor, and then we'll pull it out. It's a 5mm Allen, and we'll make some room for removing the bell housing bolts and getting the transmission to drop down. All right, we removed the connectors for the O2 sensors, and now we're removing the crank sensor. It's a 5mm Allen. All right, and with the crank sensor removed, you can then lower down the SMG cooler here, removing that bolt there, along with this Torx here. All right, so this bolt here was an E12, and then this one here is a 5mm Allen. With both bolts removed, all you have to do is slide the cooler towards the rear of the vehicle to get it off of this little tab right here. With the SMG cooler out of the way, we can get to this round plug here that just comes out of its holder, and then you twist it, lefty loosey, righty tighty, and then there is a couple of square plugs up here. You want to be very careful with the wiring on both of those plugs. One of them goes to the hydraulic unit on the top of the transmission, and you don't want to mess up those wires. They're prone to go bad. All right, now that we have all of these connectors undone, it's time to put the transmission jack on to support the SMG while we take off the transmission support here so we can get to the drive shaft bolts, and then lower the SMG down and get to all the bell housing bolts. Now we're going to remove the transmission support. It's got 6 13mm bolts there, and then there's also 13 here and here for the mounts. We now have access to the drive shaft. On the drive shaft, we're only removing the 3 bolts that are on the actual shaft. We're leaving the flex disc on, and we also marked the shaft here so everything goes back the same way it came off. And these bolts for the drive shaft going through the disc are 18mm head for the bolt and 18mm for the nut. All right, we removed all of the bolts for the drive shaft here, but to get the drive shaft off of the flex disc, we have to remove the center support bearing bolts, and we have put this strap here so the drive shaft doesn't hang and cause potential damage up there. Both of these bolts are 13mm. With the center support bearing bolts out, the drive shaft pretty much fell apart from the flex disc. So now we're gonna put the center support bolts back in, leaving this side of the drive shaft disconnected. The reason for this is so it's a little bit easier to get the SMG completely out of the vehicle. All right, now that we have the drive shaft removed and all of the electrical, we can lower the tranny jack so it's at an angle so we can get to the 10 E12 bell housing bolts. All right, so we'll go to the spare SMG we have here. On top of the 10 bell housing bolts, there's also these 2 starter bolts you have to take out. The third one will hold the starter in place, and you can leave that in so the starter doesn't move, but you do have to take these 2 bolts out for the starter also. All 10 bell housing bolts are removed. We also leveled out the transmission with the tranny jack here so that we can separate the SMG from the S85 and go straight towards the rear of the car. All right, so here we have quite the gap between the SMG and the engine. The shaft isn't all the way out of the clutch pack there, but looking in, we can see the problem on this car. There's the slave cylinder, and it's completely blown out, which is why we have all the fluid inside the bell housing. And BMW makes it so you have to be inside the bell housing to undo the nuts for the slave cylinder. All right, the SMG is out of the car. Again, the issue with the slave cylinder, it's not supposed to just come apart like that. And then pivot fork's in the way, but there's a nut at the 6 and 12 o'clock position there. Here's a better view of the slave cylinder, or what's left of it, and then the nuts that are holding it on. We also notice that the pivot pin is missing a little bit of itself. With the transmission removed, we can now replace the clutch and get the flywheel off. There's a special tool that goes in here that keeps all the discs in line in case we're going to reuse it. On this one, we're not reusing the clutch, so we technically don't really need to do this, but it'll be good for visual inspection and make sure everything's in line. We can check for damage. So we're going to put the special tool in and then release all the bolts around here in half-turn increments. And there is an order. Put a little picture up on the screen here. We also numbered them, kind of hard to see on the camera, but help keep track of it as we go. Here's the special tool that we're going to be putting into the clutch. When it goes in all the way, a couple tabs pop out here, and then as you release these screws that are holding the pressure plate on, it expands, and then this tool keeps it all in line. Alright, the tool is engaged. We can now start releasing the screws. Something else we're going to need to do is clean up the inside of the transmission here. From when the slave cylinder exploded, we got fluid everywhere. We also need to make sure that this cap here isn't leaking and the seal behind there is not leaking also. So we're going to have to clean it up first. Now that all the clutch bolts are out, the tool is tight. There's no free play in it. From when you first put the tool in and engage it, there's some play there because once you release the bolts, the clutch pack expands and now it makes it tight right there. So we can now remove the clutch. All right, here's the clutch out of the car. We put some zip ties through here so that the clutch discs don't move and go out of alignment. Now that we have those in there, we can pull the release on the special tool and remove it because we'll need the tool to install the new clutch. With the clutch removed, the next thing we're going to be removing is the flywheel. The flywheel doesn't look like it has bad hot spots or anything, so we're going to send it out to be resurfaced. With the flywheel out, we can send it off to be resurfaced. While the flywheel is being resurfaced, we're going to replace the slave cylinder that is broken. The first thing we're going to do is remove the clutch position sensor here, also known as the PLCD. It's got two 4mm Allens that hold it on. And after that, we can take off the 17 that holds the line on. With the position sensor and the hard line removed, we can now remove the two 13mm nuts that hold the slave cylinder into the bell housing. Alright, slave cylinder removed. Time to install the new one. When reinstalling the slave cylinder, the nuts that hold it on are torqued to 25 Newton meters. The torque spec for the banjo bolts is 14.5 Newton meters. The torque spec for the clutch position sensor bolts are 2.5 Newton meters. The thing we're going to do is replace this cowl right here. See how the seal is kind of all cracked. It doesn't look the most desirable, so we're just going to much better. Genuine BMW windshield cowl installed. Definitely enhances the look. Now we're just going to get the rest of the engine bay put back together. So now we're going to put the clutch back together. So we need to lube right here with a thin layer, lube the slave cylinder, our upgraded pivot pin, we'll have some lube right here, and then the new shift lever is going to have lube here and here. So yeah, just lube up this guy. Then our throwout bearing. Now that we have this back together, we can put the flywheel and the clutch on. It's kind of hard to see, but one of the holes here has the guide on it, and then there's a hole on the flywheel that's bigger than the rest. So we'll line it up with that. Now that the flywheel's on, we'll torque it in this pattern shown here to 105 Newton meters. All right, so here's our new clutch. Here's the BMW special tool on the vise. So basically what we're gonna do is cut these straps. You don't want the discs to move because they're all timed together. And then we'll put the clutch on the special tool and then assemble it into the car. All right, so the clutch is on the special tool. We got the little teeth engaged here, but it still doesn't have tension on it because the giant ring they put on the other side will take off once it's assembled. But now we can go fit it to the vehicle. All right, so we torqued all 9 of the bolts here for the clutch to the flywheel and half-turn revolutions until they got to 10 Newton meters plus or minus 2. And so now we can remove this ring that comes with the new clutch. So it'll expand out, and then we can remove the special tool. All right, so removing this clip is pretty easy. You just gotta squeeze in here. Boop, that's off, and then we can take the special tool out. Nice. Should probably also note that there are marks on the clutch and the flywheel that need to be 180 degrees off from each other, which we did verify they are. So now we can reinstall the transmission. All right, the SMG's back in, we got it bolted up. A little tip, when you're tightening these bolts, make sure you go on the torque spec and don't use an impact, because if you over tighten those and strip the holes that they go into, there's a plate inside the body and you have to cut through the floor to replace it, so be careful of that. All right, so now transmission's all in, all the exhaust is on. Left all the covers off so we can run it and check for leaks. But before we run it, we have to put some fluid in the SMG. So the gearbox takes its own fluid, and then this side of the transmission takes Pentosan, CH11S, same as the power steering fluid. And the fill for it, if you can see the plug, it's right up there. It's an 8mm Allen. So we're gonna take that plug off and get it filled with fluid, so then we can do the relearn and the bleeding and the whole adaptation for the transmission. So here's the plug for the reservoir, and the torque on it I believe is 2 Newton meters. So we noticed during editing that the footage for this didn't have any audio. So we're gonna be doing all the SMG adaptations with this M6. And this one will be on the channel very soon for quite a few things, so let's hop right into ISTA. All right, first step, having the battery charger hooked up. Step is gonna be putting our Beamer Geeks cable in. It's a K-CAN D-CAN cable. Just goes under the dash on the M6. We have power to the cable indicated by the light there. On the E60 M5, the DLC or OBD2 connector will be right here. On the M6, that's where we have it. Now we'll put the other end of the cable into the USB on the computer, whichever one you have designated for the communication. And then we'll go to ignition 2. So this is off 1. See how some of the lights came on? iDrive turned on. If we push the button again, all of the lights come on and iDrive comes on. So that's ignition position 2, which is what we're gonna need to be in. So when we go to ISTA and have it opened up here, we can just go right up here to this top corner under operations, and then the second tab on the second level here for read out vehicle data, and then down in the bottom corner, complete identification. And on the e-chassis cars, it's gonna take a little bit for it to load up, but you'll be able to, in that time, look at all the vehicle information, verify everything's correct as far as mileage, rear wheel drive or not, paint color, all of that. So definitely verify the engine that's in it too. All right, so for our situation where we do the slave cylinder, but there's only 2 options as far as the relearns goes, we're going to go into the transmission control replacement menu. So we have the 2 options that we had for the slave cylinder, along with 2 additional options. We wanted to learn as much of the transmission as possible in one shot, so we're gonna go with this one. These also have to be done in order, so you have to start at 1, go down to 4. So starting with number 1 here, this is after bleeding the SMG. We'll do the clutch valve characteristics and push continue. And then it'll ask you about if the car is engine off, ignition on, say yes, and then continue. And then it will begin. At that time, you will get an indication on the dash for transmission malfunction. iDrive will tell you clutch adaptation active. Then you can watch here that it is running the test. You can see here that it is running the teach-in program. It says it up top there. When it's complete, it will say terminated. And I'll say terminated whether it's successful or unsuccessful. Kind of just read the box on it here and see what it's telling you. That's the reason for the termination. Another thing I suggest doing while you're doing any of the tests or waiting in ISTA is on the other side here. This information is always usually pretty helpful and informative, so highly suggest reading through that. See up here how it says program terminated, but it says teach-in completed, so that's successful. So we'll go down, push continue. It's going to save the teach-in values, and then it's also going to show us before and after. So there's a little bit of change there. We did change a few things. So now I'll go to number 2 here, teaching the complete transmission, and that's going to be on the gearbox side of it. So here we go. No park brake applied. And then having the clutch disengaged, so having a neutral, engine off, ignition on. So then we'll click yes, go down, push continue, and you'll be able to hear when it starts shifting. Alright, then I'll say program terminated, and then it also says the learning of the gearbox has been completed. So then push continue. And then same thing with the saving of the teach-in values. Do not have too much as far as change goes on that one. And that notification is just telling you that by doing this, it's going to set some codes. It's usually SMG 1, 2, and 3 codes for CAN communication. We can just clear those. Same thing happens when you flash a tune onto the MSS65 DME. But we'll go to number 3 here, teach-in clutch slipping point. So for this, we'll have it in neutral, engine on, and running at idle. No accelerator pedal, input and transmission, input speed is also 0. So you can click yes, but before continuing, we need to have the engine running. So start it up here. And even though this is a DIY, let's get a little V10 cold start. We can push continue. Alright. Still has the notification. And it is teaching the clutch slipping point. it says terminal 15 on or ignition on, it means past 1 to 2. So ignition 2, and then push continue. All right, then here are the values before and after. And then now we can go to the last option, number 4 here, for teaching in the longitudinal acceleration sensor. Terminal 15 on, engine off. Vehicle must be parked on flat, level surface. That is very important. Vehicle must be stationary and must not be loaded. So, where it says vehicle must not be loaded, BMWs, technically when you align them, you are supposed to have a certain amount of weight in every seating position, but that is still not considered loaded because there's no person in it. So we've done these both ways, whether it be person in or person not in. Not in seems to work the best because you can get a true 0 that way, and then the SMG can adapt accordingly. So we'll roll down the passenger window and then be able to click OK through that, since we will not need to turn the vehicle on after this. So we'll roll down the window, hop out, and we'll continue with the last step. All right, so now that we're out of the vehicle, push continue, and then it says program running, so we'll give it a second to go through the procedure. All right, it'll only take about a minute or so, and we have program is complete, so push continue. Here are the differences in values. All right, now that we've completed all of the procedures here, go back to the return to menu. All right, and then you can just go ahead and click number 6 down here for in test module. And then what we'll have to do will be go back to vehicle information, display fault memory down in the corner, pull up these codes, and then we will click the option here for delete fault memory. We're gonna have to do this twice though. So it's deleting, all the modules will turn gray, and then it should automatically do another whole vehicle system test. And then modules will come back green, and there'll be a couple that are yellow. Click start vehicle test at the bottom because it did not do it automatically. And click yes. Now you can see it going through the different modules. All right, now we'll go down here to display fault memory. Okay, then we'll go down here to display fault memory. And typically, you would have the SMG 1, 2, and 3 CAN codes here, but the only one now is the alternator. So if you do have those SMG codes, just clear them, they won't come back. Like I said earlier, those come on even when you just flash the DME, so that's all you have to do to recalibrate and relearn the SMG completely. Whether you do PLCD, sensor, the SMG module, clutch, even just taking it apart, recommend just doing the complete relearn. It doesn't take too much longer, and you never know what parts have gotten worn and what's changed. So, all right, so now that we have the transmission adaptions learned, we'll go back to the Texas M6. All right, guys, that completes the SMG portion of this project. So now we can move on to bleeding the Vanos system, getting the wheels back on it, making sure we don't have any leaks. We've got a few other things we're going to be doing to this car too. So tune in for episode 3, where we'll get this out on the road, and we're going to make it sound a little bit more sporty. It's got stock exhaust right now. We're going to have to change that. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you guys in part 3.